If you'd like to hear all the ins and outs of the mitochondria as it pertains to cancer and or about the famous Poly-MVA product, stick around for an interview with Al Sanchez. When our son Ryder was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 11 days before his first birthday, my wife Teddy and I knew we weren't going to leave anything that could get him well on the table. We've worked with countless doctors and health experts, moved away from our family and friends, raised and spent tens of thousands of dollars, even built a non-toxic house in the middle of the woods, all in the name of healing. Today, Ryder is happy and healthy, and we live more fulfilling lives than before the diagnosis. This is a revolution against what causes cancer and disease, and against what people think about how to reverse it. Whether you're actively healing and want to know all your options, keeping it behind you, or making sure cancer never touches your family, this is your revolution. This is the anti-cancer revolution. From integrative to alternative to energetic, we walk down all paths of wellness, free of bias. My name is Ryan Sternagel. Enjoy the journey. Let's first address the elephant in the room for anyone watching or listening for that matter. I'm sure the small child strapped to my back will not go unnoticed. All I can say is it's 2020 and Rocky and I are making this thing work one way or the other. That said, Al Sanchez is one of my favorite people to talk to about cancer in general, and you'll see why. Not a doctor himself, but he goes to probably more integrative doctor conferences than most doctors, as his product, Poly-MVA, is one that a whole lot of them recommend, so he's got a lot of quote-unquote professional type knowledge, but he's also talking to a lot of patients who use the product, so he's very grounded in the real world of what it takes to manage a diagnosis. This interview has now become an oldie but a goodie, as it was recorded actually just about a year ago now. At first, Al was making some changes to the way he sold the product, so we held off releasing it, and that merged into my general lack of organization, and here we are now. I want to let you know before we get to the interview very quickly one major announcement. Before we do, this will be the last interview-based podcast you hear under the name The Anti-Cancer Revolution. That's right, it's been a good run, but this is the end. And the start of something much better. I'm going to be including subject areas you might call a bit more on the fringes of health, but deserve to be in everyone's toolbox. Energy healing, the power of prayer and intention, even crystals, all that stuff. And I don't necessarily want to paint that big of a target on my back, running around talking about this stuff under the banner of cancer, or reversing cancer, I should say. So we're changing it to a bit more non-threatening name, which is the great work of healing. I'll tell you more about that name itself in the first new episode, but that's what it is, the great work of healing. That said, the show known as the Anti-Cancer Revolution will remain. However, it's just changing. We've got such great feedback from this year's big online conference that's wrapping up, the Anti-Cancer Revolution 2, Evidence-Based Medicine, in that the talks were not interviews whatsoever and more reflected professional, comprehensive presentations you'd typically only see at a physician-to-physician conference, that we've decided to keep that going throughout the year. The Anti-Cancer Revolution show will now largely be featuring actual presentations that have been given at actual medical conferences on cancer, along with some of the best presentations from this year's event in case you happen to miss them. So again, interviews on all things integrative to alternative to energetic healing, the great work of healing, professional presentations on integrative approaches to cancer, the Anti-Cancer Revolution. The absolute best and really only way to stay informed on exactly where to find everything as the great work of healing will be a new show you've got to find and subscribe to, is to be sure you're on our email list, which you can do at thesternmethod.com if you're not already. All right, that's way too much housekeeping for one intro, but had to be done. I'll let you get to this very informative interview with Al Sanchez and see you back here on the other side. Al Sanchez, welcome to the Anti-Cancer Revolution. How are you today?
Doing well. How about yourself, Ryan?
Doing well myself. Yeah, I'm excited to get you on. This will be the second. Well, you give a really good presentation is why I was just telling you before we started recording. I've gone to so many different integrative or alternative cancer conferences and seen all of these different naturopathic oncologists and whatnot, gave all these great presentations. And that's what I did with the summit, is bring a lot of them into, that event that wouldn't normally be in an event like that, and went over really well. And I've seen you give a presentation as well. And, it's a little different because you represent a product. You're not necessarily, you're not a doctor, but
Right.
unless you are, and I don't know that.
No, not a
Okay.
doctor. I can't remember what one gentleman called me from, my 20 years of doing this, because my father was a PhD and then became a researcher. And then after my sister passed away, that's what brought me in to just help him out. And then, long story short, that's what, sat me literally in this chair as the president of the company. But it's always been driven by that passion, as similar with your experience, from a family's need and trying to better understand it, and then getting swallowed up by the information that's out there, and then kind of going scratching your head at some point going, okay, this was true, but that stuff wasn't. And they knew this, but why didn't they know that?
Yeah.
And, and so you start that journey and that path as you did, and you come to where I'm at now here 20 years later and go, wow. And to have those discussions, thank you for, I've seen those hundreds of presentations, maybe thousands of presentations by this time in my life, and always walking away with, okay, but how did you help the patient? How did you help that person that is sitting in the chair looking for the answer for their specifics? You can talk in generalities and talk about treatments and protocols, but at the end of the day, how does that patient feel? Did you give them something that you gave them hope, they gave them an option? Because if you didn't, then in my opinion, you missed the point. And so, being affiliated with Poly-MVA has been a blessing, and what a wonderful opportunity. But, it's easy for me to say that because that's, of course, my business as well. So I ask people, please take that with a grain of salt, because of course I'm going to talk about it. That's what I know. But guess what? I will tell you about it, and let you make that decision, because it has to resonate with the individual, with the doctor, with that protocol. And does it help you? Because if it does, wonderful. If it doesn't, then I want to know why too, because that in turn tells me something else. That makes sense?
It does. Yeah. And before I forget, it's funny, you reminded me that I think the last conference we saw each other at was Annie Appleseed, and I was speaking there, and they had a little program with all the different speakers' names and bios and whatnot, and mine had ND after it, naturopathic doctor. And then I posted it on Facebook because I thought it was funny, and then I had a bunch of naturopathic doctors that didn't think it was funny, and yeah, it was it's good stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's perspective, right?
Yeah.
Perspective.
Yeah.
That was interesting. We first passed each other in the elevator. Remember, I was either going up or going down, and I'm like, "Hey, Ryan, hey, what's up? Oh, I'm speaking. Oh, hey, so are you? Okay, great."
Yeah, and then I think later on in that conference, I witnessed you giving yourself a Poly-MVA IV, if I'm correct.
You did. One of the doctors there was available, and so I practice what I preach. Let's put it that way. And I do that it's interesting because I live an anti-cancer life, let's call it, and I do not even anti-cancer, just a healthy life. And so, practicing, I literally do those things because of a prevention perspective. It's so much easier to prevent than it is to treat or cure, as you well know. So I don't even want to get that cancer initiation past that, just because of the familial cancer history of my family, with my mother that passed away at 36, my sister at 40, and technically my grandmother at 89. But 3 different time frames of the epigenetics that gave them the disease.
And is that, I want to just ask what got was it the family component that got your dad into it to start, or did that happen after your dad was already into it, into making this product? And, before I forget, I just wanted to say that, the reason that I wanted to get you on was, one, I've seen this I don't say this presentation because we're not just going to have you give a presentation here, but you know, I've seen you present, and you see a lot of product people present, and it's just, you know, kind of boring about the product or whatever, and that's it. But it, you know, you can tell you definitely, you know, come from a patient or a researcher or whatever you want to call it perspective, because it's, you know, very educated. And I haven't gotten anybody on here to really dive into mitochondria and energy and ATP and you know, how the metabolics of everything play into cancer. So it's, yeah, it's best of both worlds. But at the end of the day, you can tell you really care about making sure people actually understand what's going on from the biggest picture possible. Right. And that combined with, so the only other kind of, you know, person that represents a product sort of thing interview that I've done to date has been with the guys with Helin 951. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I said then it was, you know, kind of obvious because we've been using that from the beginning. And since kind of diving into this world, I guess you could say, every naturopathic oncologist and their brother I meet, you know, all are big fans of that product. And you are, I should say, Poly-MVA is, you know, was an obvious second choice because, again, something we've been on from the start, and every naturopathic oncologist and their brother seems to like your product. So yeah, all that being said, I'm excited to get you on, and really just, you know, this show is about everything someone going through cancer or wanting to prevent cancer would want to know about. And some people kind of shy away from talking about specific products and brand names and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's what I certainly wanted to know about and still do want to know about is the specific products and brand names and what works and what doesn't. So yeah, I'm excited to get, you know, this component being a more regular part of the show. And that being said, yeah, excited to get you, excited you're here from the start of it. So all that being said, yeah, I've always wondered what got your dad into it in the first place. You mentioned your mother and your sister. Was it that impetus, or was he already doing this kind of research prior?
No, he was not doing it. He was, you know, father of 4 kids and happily married and starting a family in California. And after moving there from New Mexico, and mom comes down with cancer in 71 and passes away in 72, and left with, you know, a 16-year-old. My brother was 12, my sister was 5, and I was 3. So 20 days after my 3rd birthday, lose my mom, and that, you know, just the love of his life and the reason that sent him, you know, and he did everything conventional because that's all they had then, you know. But my dad, being a background of in research and in education, looked at different things, wondered about different things, but just ran out of time, right? Which happens in most cancer situations. That's the problem. It's not really treating the disease in a certain way, if I'm maybe so bold to say that. It's that we have such a short window of time to typically treat the disease. That's the problem. Yep. Then the patient gets overwhelmed with all this stuff that's out there, you know, and what you're doing is trying to hone that down for them to shorten that window for them and say, hey, you know, these are the things that you use personally, so that's a wonderful thing. These are the things that the doctors are using. You know, find what works. Hopefully this saves you some time, because that's the deal, it's a time crunch. So my dad loses that, and, you know, it evolved. So it takes really another 20 years for that to fully flourish in his life, to where it brings him down from here in California. We lived up in Orange County, up by Disneyland. He comes down to San Diego because my older sister had moved down here. That puts him in touch with a lot of the alternative and integrative clinics right here in San Diego, as well as in Mexico. He starts meeting people, and it just escalates, and it just, you know, snowballs from there for him. For me, so then we fast forward another 10 years on top of that, and my sister comes down with it. She passes away, and she was more like my mom because, and I was only 3 when my mother passed away. So I didn't experience that. Sure, I grew up without a mom, and that was difficult, but I didn't experience that loss. But I surely did when Tina passed away. And I said, okay, Dad, what are you doing? Let me try and help you out. What's going on? And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's man. Well, yeah, that's certainly what I'm doing here today. What you're doing here, but pretty much half or more of the people I interview, it's some kind of story like that. And I always,
Mhm.
you know, I'm always glad that the situation worked. I mean, it's a crappy situation, but that it worked out to where somebody is out helping the world. So yeah.
I believe, call it your calling, depending on what your faith is and how you perceive what goes on in our daily lives. Clearly, it was an opportunity, and like yourself, how do you not share that information to help people? I can't not do that, right? And especially at this stage in my life. Well, just the fact that if it was going to be about business, this isn't the business I'd be in, because this is too personal. We unfortunately, most of the people that I come in contact with, um, you don't hear back from them, and that's hard. And yet, you, it's the desire to help them along in the best way that I can. And like you said, in my presentations, I try and empower and give knowledge to these people as to what their journey is going to be and how metabolism and mitochondria play a role. And I hope, because if they understand that, then I found that it makes it easier for them to do these various protocols and these various approaches that they're going to be asked to do. That's that, and I think that's what doctors miss many of the times, is that we're so used into a system that if, quote unquote, the doctor says this, you just do it. And yet here we are against the traditional oncology that says surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, that's all you're going to get. You're going to die. What? Come on. There's got to be something bigger to that, right? Your common sense tells you that. And yet you
Yep.
go to the naturopathic oncologist and they're going to say X, Y, and Z to do that. And here I sit like you do in the middle going, well, maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe it's a timing thing. Maybe how do we build a better mousetrap, using that metaphor? Because there are times where chemotherapy and radiations and surgeries are very good things. So you can't cancel them out. And there's many times where these nutritional IVs and supplements and lifestyle protocols are very powerful as well, but they're not going to take care of what the surgery could do. So, but you kind of better do them both, because your body needs those things to heal no matter which way you go, right? So how do we build that from that perspective? If we can be, you and I can be bridge builders, that's what I think our goal is, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah. No, from the start, this has always been just putting out what we're finding out about while we're trying to help our son, and it's grown into something pretty neat.
Yeah.
Um, all that being said, yeah. Speaking of your empowering presentations and all that good stuff, you want to, I guess, just get into what what you mean by the concept of metabolic medicine and how this ties into the mitochondria discussion in cancer and all that good stuff.
Sure. The easiest thing I think that resonates with most people is when you say the word fatigue. So, and I like to use the analogy of, okay, well, we've all probably had the flu and been laid up in bed, been pretty sore and achy and pretty fatigued, right? You look at a cancer patient and you're like, they're pretty fatigued, laid up in bed, don't have much oomph to get around. So kind of the same, but yet different, right? With the flu, you're not too worried about it. They give or take 3 to 7 days, and if you rest and if you get your fluids and take your supplements and things, your body's immune system's going to kick in and you're going to repair yourself, and you'll be sore for a little bit, but you're going to be okay. Cancer patient, on the other hand, a whole different scenario, but yet same approach. The immune system, the fatigue, the body's trying to now battle this scenario that we call cancer. And so the approach at a certain degree has to be the same. So this is where metabolism, mitochondria come into play, because significantly important. If we're not supporting that, then we're not going to ultimately help the body to heal itself. So how can we get a more targeted therapy in a cancer case as we would someone that we say had the flu?
And so when we're talking about cellular metabolism and fatigue and energy and all that stuff, so is the concept giving your immune system more energy to do its job?
At a very simple level, yes, totally.
Yeah.
Your immune system, when it's going to fight any disease, starts, like, let's say we got 100% of our energy reserve on a daily basis. And the second we become sick, flu or cancer, all that energy, that normally that 100% is used in the day to do what your day-to-day is. All of a sudden you're sick, so guess what? Slide that over maybe 20%, maybe 80%, I don't know. I'm sure you've been sick where, you slept for a day straight or something because your body was just so out of it because cytokines, all the things are being released to telling you to rest, forcing you to rest, right? Many times we don't listen, we force ourselves through it. But ultimately, it has to rest. That's where our body restores ourselves, even in our daily cycle, right? We're up for, 12, 14 hours, 18 hours a day, and you got to sleep. And then when does your body repair itself? In your sleep cycle. So these are natural things, the way our bodies work. So how do we support that? And this is where, metabolically speaking, the protocols that these doctors are using, this metabolic medicine approach that they're utilizing, is factoring that in. So not only are we going to support and target that patient-specific disease or diagnosis, but part of our approach is going to be metabolic medicine, targeting that metabolism, making sure that's at its highest level because the immune system is drawing down on it, the patient's liver, the patient's kidneys, everything else is going to be drawn down on that energy. And if we don't support it, we know it's not going to be helpful.
Yeah, and so on that note, could you dive into, I guess a little more specifically in terms of what we're talking about with cellular metabolism and the mitochondria. And I think when it comes to cancer especially, it just seems like the term metabolic anything or cellular metabolism anything has somehow gotten conflated with like the ketogenic diet. And so now, it's like half people when they hear, because I think maybe the real big keto fans just picked up on, well, there is obviously difference in the way the cells are metabolizing energy.
Correct.
On the two different diets, but maybe they were the ones to really, pick up on that and start using that term, I guess.
Right.
But it's, but then I'll hear, I don't know, Dr. Neil McKinney on the summit we did, the Anti-Cancer Revolution Summit. He did a whole presentation on cellular metabolism as it applies to cancer and targeting mitochondria and so on and so forth, and didn't mention the ketogenic diet once. And so I just hope, I guess, with that background in mind, if you could just give a little more definition for folks on what we're talking about with cellular metabolism and how the mitochondria plays into cancer cells, healthy cells, all that jazz.
So I wish I had some pictures because they're worth 1,000 words, but basically the mitochondria are powerhouses of our cells. They provide all the energy for whether it's your single cell of that tissue to do any type of work. So your kidney cell, your liver cell, your nervous system, your brain, your muscle tissues. Most people are realize that in muscle work, right? If you're going to go work out, you're going to be an athlete, you need to get more calories because your body's going to be burning more energy. Okay. However, when you're sick, same thing, but your muscles don't need it. Now your immune system needs it. So we better keep these mitochondria as healthy as possible because when those start to suffer, the body starts to drop off. And for all of us that have lost power supply on our cell phone or our computer, guess what, right? Funny things start to happen when the power level gets low. So similarly, no different in our bodies. So that's how important mitochondria are because nothing gets done in our bodies. It's not going to repair, tissues aren't going to heal, organs aren't going to function if energy isn't produced. Another powerful metaphor or picture of that is think of your heart. And this I think puts it in a really good perspective. The mitochondria in the average tissue, they say, is between 200 to 1,000. Well, in your heart muscle, it's anywhere between 3,500 to 5,000. Mitochondria.
You're talking about individual units of mitochondria per cell?
Per cell, exactly. So let's do that math, right? In a body that takes, let's call it 30 trillion cells. and you on average have 2,500 per cell. Do you realize how many? We're not talking a couple hundred, we're talking trillions of mitochondria that are required to keep us going. That's just to keep us going, let alone when you get sick. So that's how important they are. So they're so important, they have their own DNA, right? You can take mitochondria out of the cell, but you can't take anything else out because then it can survive on its own. Pretty unique little critters and pretty powerful things. Well, it happens to be that in cancer, the mitochondria are the things that become dysfunctional. Inside the cell, the mitochondria take a different path than your healthy cells do in utilizing sugar. So that's why people a lot of times hear things, don't eat sugar, don't take sugar, stay away from sugar because it feeds cancer cells. Yeah, at a very high level, that is true. Now, but we have to break that down to really kind of say, it's a little more complicated than that. It's not just that, because now we get in the type of diet. So you mentioned ketogenic. Why is that? How come that? Out of the food that we eat on a general basis, whatever it might be, 30% of the food that you take in, of what you normally need to survive, goes to our brain, right? The other 30% simply goes to the energy to help digest that food, and then the other third is used by other things of the body. So a third of what the calories you eat on a normal, if you eat a 2,000 calorie diet, let's say, a third of those calories go directly to your brain, a third goes to processing and digesting, and the other third is left over for the body. So you can see how important that diet is to how you're going to feel, how your body's going to regulate itself, and in the case of a cancer patient, how a cancer patient is going to then metabolize or be able to fight the cancer, if that makes sense. So ketogenic diet is an approach that minimizes the type of food and the types of oils, the types of sugars, the types of carbs that then allow the body to do those three things. And when it comes to cancer that feeds on simple sugars, that's the angle that they're taking. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of it in a simple nutshell. And then we can, you'll have ketogenic people and the dietitians, and the basic message is eat a low carb, high fiber, high vegetables, a balanced amount of protein. And then we can argue about the specifics of should it be this and should it not be that, and this chicken and farm raised. The more natural, the more healthy, of course, the better the food is for you, right?
Where do you stand on, speaking of the ketogenic folks, for lack of a better term, or just, what catchphrases that this whole movement has popularized, but cancer is a metabolic disease in that, the conjecture that it's not genetic like the conventional view thought of. It's you find the damage to mitochondria and then all the different genetic mutations and what have you that you find within a cancer cell, cancer tumor, et cetera, are all downstream effects of that original mitochondrial damage. But, so then there's that, which obviously makes a whole lot of sense. But then you talk to some other folks on the natural side of the fence who say, well, that might be true, but then it also might be like, who says that epigenetically they didn't open themselves up to the mitochondrial damage in the first place, and then therefore it's the epigenetic side of it is what triggered the whole thing, and that sort of thing. You're nodding your head for people just listening.
Call it the old chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
Which one was the first event? It's both, to be honest, right? There's a synergy, there's a hand play. What your epigenetics, what your environment is going to play a role. What your genes are going to play a role. It's not either or, it's both. It's not just metabolism. There are plenty of people that are and have had poor metabolism and they don't get cancer. There's plenty of people that are healthier and have always eaten clean and what have you, and they get cancer. So it's not one or the other, it's both. Is it in our genes as well? It is. I mean, when you look at genetically how our DNA has to replicate and how many my goodness, if you looked into DNA at all and the replication process of a cell and how many cells go bad in that process out of 50 trillion cells that are replacing themselves, right, every few years, by the time mistakes happen, genes get broken up, something didn't get transcribed right. If a gene, it's so complex that it's not explainable at a certain level. And to just bring it down to that simplistic of a statement that it's just your genes or it's just your metabolism, I think doesn't do justice to our own DNA and the billions of gene pairs and combinations and let alone you don't even talking about hormones and cytokines and the pathways that have to happen just in metabolism by itself. You know, I have this, where did I put it? Not that you could probably see it, but since it's right here at my desk. So if you could see that clearly, which I'll try and get up, like there's the Krebs cycle, right? That's just one little cycle, right? Now, this one is the entire metabolic pathway. I'm going to try and get it close to see it. But look how big it is. Look how complicated.
Yeah,
right?
100 times crazier than a New York subway map. Yeah.
That's right. So take that, and that's just one pathway in one mitochondria out of those trillions of mitochondria. And if something goes wrong in this one pathway and this doesn't work, it fails. And what happens? If the repair mechanisms and the other subsystems of the body and the cells and inside the DNA don't react properly to take care of that or fix it, by definition, all of a sudden you have a cancer cell. So when we talked about cancer being a metabolic disease, you're right. A cancer cell no longer needs to generate ATP the normal way in the mitochondria, takes 1 unit of sugar and burns it in glycolysis and generates 2 units of ATP, kicks out the Krebs cycle altogether and says, don't need it because I'm not doing any work. So if I'm, let's say, a kidney cancer cell, I no longer have to become a kidney cancer cell. I don't got to go do what kidneys do. All I got to do is sit here and replicate and replicate and replicate. I don't need much energy for that because that's my design now. I'm now doing that, just replicating. Okay, then glycolysis and quote unquote cancer metabolism is exactly what you need. It's doing what it knows how to do best. That's what it does. The difficulty is that that's one of our own cells. So if our immune system wasn't in good shape to recognize that, it lets it go. Instead of going, hey guys, that's a bad guy over there. He's got dysfunctional metabolism. Go shut him down and take care of him, guys. Nope. The signal doesn't happen, passes it right by. He hangs out. What does he do? Replicate, 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 replicate. 5, 8, 10 years later, whatever it might be, all of a sudden, you've got a problem in your kidney. You hope it gets picked up early enough. If it does, cool, they take care of it. If it doesn't, oh, sorry, we missed it. Everything was great. It was stage 4, metastatic. Those little buddies now spread all over your body. Nothing we can do. Have a nice day. But that's it. So I hopefully that helped to kind of understand and demystify this whole metabolic thing. It's both. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you may have, I always jump back and forth between listening intently and figuring out what next question I'm going to ask. You mentioned it at the end there and kind of in passing the difference in energy production, but did you go into the difference between anaerobic and aerobic respiration in terms of, cancer cells using oxygen versus not using oxygen? Right.
That's actually a great lead in because now that we kind of covered metabolism at a really low level, why is this whole discussion for protocols and oncological approach all about oxygen, right? Because you'll hear everybody talk about, okay, it's all about the metabolism. Well, you can't talk about metabolism without technically talking about oxygen. So whether it's these intravenous therapies, hyperbaric oxygen chambers, even proper metabolism requires oxygen. Some will talk about how cancer cells, they don't need the oxygen. Well, they need a little bit of oxygen, but they are typically metabolically deficient, meaning they don't require it the same way your normal cells do. They can live in an oxygen deficient environment as your normal cells can, right? And so let me give you an example. You're a cross-country marathon runner and you're at the end of your 26-mile marathon. you run out of sugar to burn. You know, you're breathing so hard, you don't have anything. What do your cells do? They'll go into glycolysis because there's not enough oxygen in the system. Guess what? For all of us that have ever worked out after a while, wait and get sore the next day, right? You got a little bit too much lactic acid built up in your muscle tissue, so you're nice and sore because you didn't have the stores in your muscles. That's what makes them sore. Cancer cells are kind of the same pathway. They're using glycolysis. They're just taking that one sugar molecule, splitting it in two just to survive, just to get by. As soon as oxygen returns, your normal cells will go, oh, cool, oxygen, reverse that motor, turn the mitochondria back on because oxygen is present. We're back to normal. The cancer cell is stuck in that state because it doesn't know any better per se. So oxygenation is so key in this difference between anaerobic, which means, right, either utilizing oxygen or not utilizing oxygen. So you have aerobic oxygen, anaerobic no oxygen, or low oxygen. Actually, so a lot of times people think that it's no oxygen, but it's actually very, very low amount of oxygen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And so where do you land on, you know, given that, obviously this is where hyperbaric comes in, and, you know, let's pump a lot of oxygen back into the system. But I've heard, you know, and maybe I'm taking their words out of context, but some cancer doctors on this side of the fence again make the statement that, you know, yes, cancer cells can survive independently of oxygen, but why does that, you know, why does that mean that oxygen is necessarily going to be harmful to a cancer cell? You know what I mean? Because it's just saying that they're able to survive without oxygen doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the presence of oxygen is going to be advantageous to health and disadvantageous to cancer cells.
Right. So what that does is it creates a better environment, because you could take, you know, cancer and put it in the presence of pure oxygen and high oxygen concentration. It's not going to change anything. It's going to still be a cancer cell. Just by having oxygen present doesn't do necessarily anything for that cancer cell, let's say. But if that cancer cell is next to a healthy cell and you put it both in the oxygen-rich environment, which one is likely to flourish?
Yeah.
There you go. So that's the gift / power of doing oxygenating type protocols, whether it's ozone, whether it's hyperbarics, whether it's IV vitamin C, these things that are creating different reactions downstream. You're trying to trigger a systemic cascade of health, let's call it. I like that. A systemic cascade of health by oxygenation, hyperbarics, right? All the hyperbarics is going to do is just help enrich the environment. That's all. It's not going to force it. It's not going to change a paradigm. It's not, no. But would your body heal better in a higher oxygenation concentration than a lower one? Yes, it will. Yep. Okay, then. Why would that not be a good thing to give someone who's fatigued, along with these metabolic protocols, to enhance metabolism, to improve their energy levels? I don't know. It sounds like common sense to me, right?
Yeah, I suppose it's, yeah, I'm sure he's not the only guy to say it, but one of my favorite naturopathic oncologist, because he was Ryder's original naturopathic oncologist, but Dr. Paul Anderson, that's one thing he loves to say is I don't care about your cancer cells as much as your healthy cells.
That's correct. Because, right. What a great perspective as a visual. You know, why am I going to worry about this little tumor, let's call it that big, versus your entire body, when I need to focus on, okay, I can do both. I can oxygenate and take care of 95% of the rest of your body and make sure that's up to par as best I can. And then I can utilize targeted protocols to go after that little tumor very specifically, and not cut, burn, or poison it, or do it in a way that's healthier. That's a better approach. It's a better mousetrap. It's safer. It doesn't give the side effects. You can do both. That's the biggest thing that just floors me. You know, that in today's day and age, in 2019, like we were talking earlier, that more people aren't on board with this. Why would I not want to support my patient's immune system? Why would I not really want to get them healthier and oxygenated and get their metabolism up and support their immune system? They'll talk about an immunotherapy from a chemotherapeutic point of view, but they won't talk about an amino support from a supplement perspective. Are you a little nuts? Did you not remember your nutrition class? Have you not seen what that does?
Yeah,
You know, you think we're all making this stuff up, you know?
Yeah, we've managed to become very polarized as a species, I suppose.
And that's where I'm hoping that, you know, I appreciate what you're doing because you're building that bridge. You're saying, no, man, it can be both, guys. You both can help this patient out. Doctor oncologist, you have some great experience in cancer, so you can help manage that because that's your sandbox. That's your expertise. Well, guess what? Mr. or Mrs. Nutrition over here, that's their sandbox. And you both are important. And the patient needs both of you. That's not either or.
Love it. Where does inflammation fall in with all this?
We could talk about that one for hours, but so inflammation is, I like to think about it as just irritation of the body, irritation to a particular area. And for all of us, if you have an inflamed liver, right? Let's say it's upset. You have even something easier. You have an inflamed stomach because you ate a bunch of food that your stomach didn't like. So what happens to it? It gets inflamed. It doesn't like it. The acid gets thrown off. It can't do digestion properly. It's not happy. Okay. So if you keep it inflamed, if you keep inflammation, and I equate inflammation with irritation, if you keep irritation happening to any particular tissue over time, that tissue, one, can't function, and two, it can't heal. And that can help create an abnormal cell. A great example that one of the doctors once showed me is, you know, let's say you get a mosquito bite. What happens if you keep scratching that thing? It's going to get infected and it's not going to ever heal, right? And he told me, so you want to know what an old, actually it's part of the definition of the word cancer, it used to be defined as the wound that doesn't heal. Why? Lactic acid, low oxygenation. There we go. So there you are, inflammation. And it's complex. Our body uses inflammation also to heal itself. It's a triggering mechanism, cytokines.
Yeah.
So, but when you have inflammatory markers and they stay high all the time, whether it's in cardiovascular disease, whether it's in cancer, whether it's in your liver. So we can talk about IGF, we can talk about NF-kappa B, we can talk about all these cool little scientific things, but that's the basic problem. And when you stay anti-inflammatory, right, you want to get off your knees if they're inflamed, right? If your tissue is hurting, what do? You address it, ice it, lift your knee up, you know, massage therapy, do some little PT to get you back on board. But if that inflammation comes back up, what do you got to do? Knock it down. Well, plenty of good things out there that knock down inflammation, right? Turmeric, antioxidants, IVs, hydration, oxygenation. Now you're healing the body to heal itself.
So where does, and yeah, this, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question in a way that makes any sort of sense to answer, but you talk about things that knock down inflammation, but I guess that's been my one thing that I've always kind of taken a step back, and you know, it's like, well, now we're talking about things that it's almost like a, you know, it's not, but a conventional doctor suppressing the symptom as opposed to going after whatever is causing the inflammation. I suppose the easy answer to that is you want to do both. You want to, you know, knock down the inflammation and find out what's causing it in the first place. But where, I don't know, how do you go about addressing where that, you know, why the inflammation is there in the first place?
Well, so let me use a sports injury as an example, right? You twist your ankle. Okay, you hurt it. It's going to get inflamed. It's going to swell up, right? That's inflammation. So the approach is going to be take an anti-inflammatory, right? Take some Tylenol, put some ice on it, and get off it. And but is any of that going to heal the body, right? The Tylenol is simply going to knock down the pain, right? The ice, we know that brings down inflammation. And then getting off of it stops the irritation. But ultimately, the body's going to heal itself, right? Okay, so let's take that to a cancer situation.
Yeah.
we don't know necessarily, this is where we kind of talked about epigenetics and what is inflaming your liver. Well, if you drink lots of alcohol, that's going to inflame your liver. If you're taking in lots of toxins, that's going to inflame your liver. And then again, those things have other effects, right? Sometimes it might damage someone's stomach. Someone else could, drink a particular drink and they're fine. Someone else drinks a particular drink, it's going to upset their stomach. Okay. So this is where then diet and lifestyle are different for you than it might be for me, but we don't want to address that or inflame that situation by doing the things that are going to cause inflammation. We've known enough, and we now know from a lot of the research out there that certain foods are inflammatory. So this is where we now get into gut health, right? Great transition, because immune system starts in the gut. Health starts in the gut. If your digestive system is not working properly, then it can't extract the nutrients out of the food that you're taking in. Well, if all the food that you're taking in is coming out of a processed box, high sodium, high nitrates, high fillers and fibers and chemicals, what's your body going to do with all that stuff? It's looking for what? Proteins, amino acids, right? Vitamins, minerals, so it can break all those down, because those are the things that keep us healthy. So, hope that kind of get to what you were trying to get to.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I said, I probably answered my own question in start, but it's
No worries.
It's always something to think about. So yeah, that'd be. I mean, I think we've laid some groundwork. I want to save time to talk about poly itself, but I don't know. We talked about some of the basics. You just want to go in a little more into, what exactly, what is a cancer cell? How does it form, and like what happens, in the presence of inflammation, bad metabolic function, low oxygen, all that stuff. Like, we've kind of hinted at it, but what is that process there that turns a regular cell? What's going on within the cell, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, so officially that term would be called oncogenesis, the birth of a cancer cell. Now, always an interesting topic, and what it brings to my mind is Dr. Garnett, who created Poly-MVA. When he explained it to me one time, he says, when I was created in my mother's womb, as you were, right? When we all were, right? Two cells came together and created a single cell, right? One had half the information, the other had the other half information. They got together and said, hey, we got a full information to make a person. And then what was it? It was a single cell, right? And what that single cell do? Replicated, right? Yep. Went to 2 went to 4 went to 8, 32, 64, 128, right? By definition, what was it doing?
Dividing?
Just like a cancer cell, right?
Yeah.
Replicating out of control at a certain level. But it was being controlled. See where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. So here, but then all of a sudden something shifts. And all of a sudden the information comes in and said, okay, now go and become a finger, a nail, a blood vessel. Go become what you need to become. And yet it came out of all these cells that were simply replicating. But they were replicating under good, healthy metabolism with controls. Cancer cell, take away that healthy metabolism, take away those controls that told it what to go do and how to be. Now it's stuck as just a cell replicating. And so if it starts in your liver, we'll call it liver cancer. If it starts in your stomach, we'll call it stomach cancer. If it first shows up on your skin, it's now diagnosed as skin cancer. See what I mean? There's the primary source of it, an abnormal cell that happens all the time. So you have cancer cells in your body right now. Everybody walking this planet has cancer cells by definition in their body. An abnormal cell that did not replicate and is not working correctly. The difference being is that we have the repair mechanisms and the quote unquote anti-cancer mechanisms that say, oh, bad cell didn't replicate, go in, take care of it, immune system, NK killer cells, whatever it might be, done, out of the way. But if that little guy gets hung out for a while, it goes and hangs out and says, oh, hey, I got left alone over here. What do I got to do? Just replicate. We know we got to do that. Okay, replicate again. So now yet the initiation of cancer, which could be caused by just sometimes bad cellular replication. Now, we'll go walk through a nuclear reactor and get exposed to radiation. What's going to happen to your DNA? Exactly. We know if you do that, get a very specific type of cancer depending on the exposure and concentration of the radiation, but it's going to damage cells. Now, let's come back to something a little more milder. If you continually are exposed, what happens to mercury, arsenic, chemicals, toxins, right? Asbestos, right? So I'm hoping that, you know, I'm sure you see it, and anyone who listens to this can see that so many factors. Some people, man, they were around asbestos all their life, never got cancer. But not the majority of people. Some people are around all types of different chemicals. Their body was able to deal with it. So many different variables that express it, but we know that toxins are quote unquote carcinogens, right? That's why they call them carcinogens. They are known to the state of California to cause XYZ cancer. Will it cause it in you? I don't know. If that recipe is right and your body took care of it, then I guess not. If it didn't, then it did. So once that initiation, once that abnormal cells gets established, and if the body doesn't go after it and take care of it or recognize it, then you have that process in which it was initiated and now it's going to start growing. And once that process happens, in some cancers, they call them fast growing cancers, 1 to 3 years. Other cancers are typically 5 to 10. Some cancers, 10 to 20, they say. I don't know, but we know it's not like catching the flu last week and then you have it and then it's gone. It could have been there for a long time and it could have been held in check.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's on the one hand it's quite simple, on the other hand it's not.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty with cancer, because it's our own cell and metabolism is simple, but many times, like I said, we don't know about it until it comes to that stage 3 or stage 4. Yeah. And by that time it's established, it's brought down the immune system so far. And then all they're going to approach it with typically is chemo, radiation, or surgery. And we know that's just kind of doesn't work over the long term.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons, which many folks have brought to light on this show. That being said, what's the technical name for it? Lipoic Acid Mineral Complex fall in with all this?
So it's interesting in its history of the lipoic acid complex, because Dr. Garnett had looked at what many researchers had looked at, and this is that whole, I'm sure you've heard it, the Otto Warburg theory, right? Low oxygenation of cancer cells, the difference in metabolism, and said, well, if you could target that metabolic pathway, would that be beneficial? And the answer was yes. Okay, then the next one is, how would you do it? So we call it lipoic acid mineral complex because Dr. Garnett used alpha lipoic acid and used thymine, 2 cofactors of mitochondrial energy production. Happens in a little place called the Krebs cycle, in that really crazy little diagram I was showing you earlier. That's where the magic happens for mitochondria. That's where energy gets created, in the citric acid cycle, in the Krebs cycle, where oxygenation, where sugar gets broken down, and where ATP gets produced. And once that energy gets produced, now it has to get shuttled off to go do work. So it's a bit of a complex process, but if you think about the power plants that supply our homes and businesses and life with electricity. So the power plant has to produce the electricity, has to get transmitted down the power grid, has to get dropped into your house, has to get over to your plug, has to get into your computer and your internet so that we have power. Well, so it's not just about producing power, it's also about getting it to do the work that we need to do. So having power is a great thing, but if your transmission lines are broken too, if your transformer's out, if you got a bad breaker in your electrical box, it's a little more complicated, but I think hopefully you got the picture that that's the critical nature of the whole thing. How does that play out in regards to cancer itself and what we would do? That's where we have to look at that and say, okay, can we change that? And this is where Dr. Nat said, yeah, lipoic acid, and combine that with thymine, would I have a mechanism for supporting that pathway? The answer was yes. Then he researched it. Then he went forward, and Poly-MVA was born from that approach.
So it's essentially both supporting the power production or power transport pathway that you would want to see in a healthy cell, and simultaneously, would impeding it be the right word in a cancer cell?
So not necessarily impeding it, but if you start shuttling electrons or creating energy inside the mitochondria of a dysfunctional cell. So let's step back a second. The term apoptosis, that's normal cell death, kind of the broken cycle of what a cancer cell doesn't know how to do or lost the ability to do. If it gets the signal to do it, if metabolically the signal comes in to shut down, like our normal cells, right? They get the signal, but that signal, guess what? Comes from the mitochondria. When the power plant in the cell decides to power down, what's the cell to do? Oh, hey guys, our cycle's off, shifts over, go to apoptosis and turn yourself off, and the cell goes away and gets replaced. Well, in a cancer cell, it's dysfunctional. That's that dysfunctional metabolism. It's stuck in that bad loop, let's call it, like Groundhog Day, looping over and over again. Nope, just replicate. Nope, produce ATP. Nope, replicate, just produce, that's it. So if you can upregulate that process in a cancer cell, it will either turn it off, or in some cases, if it's a cancer cell that, let's say, has lost its way metabolically, and you restore proper metabolic function, then that cell can technically go on to be a normal cell. So either shut it off or make it right. So lipoic acid and thiamine are cofactors of that whole process, and that was the approach, and the oxygenation of the tissue as well.
It's made sense to me that if the energy production, like that's one of the main things that went wrong in a cancer cell in the first place, is the energy production went off. And if you could help that energy production go back on,
right,
online, would that at least hypothetically or potentially allow it to go back to being more or less of a healthy cell?
right.
Where do you, so for instance, with say red light therapy,
Okay.
That's one of its main selling points, is it supports mitochondrial health and more energy in your mitochondria and blah blah blah.
Right.
But then there's some people that say, well, a cancer patient would not want to utilize red light therapy because then it's stimulating mitochondria, and you could therefore be stimulating the cancer cell mitochondria, and it would just make for more aggressive,
more cancer cells or something of that nature.
Yeah.
So I've heard both. And so when I think of not just red light, but light therapies in general, I put them under the umbrella of what's called photodynamic therapies, because there's lots of them, right? Different wavelengths of light, different types of laser light, far infrared, near, blue, all the colors of the rainbow type light are being used at different levels and in different approaches for different things in health. But across the board, we know they support mitochondria from, I like to, if I can simplify it, plants need sunlight to grow. It's what stimulates them. So I have never seen a bit of research out there that shows that red light stimulates cancer cells to grow, because they don't have the factors in them. When you're doing glycolysis, as a cancer cell does, you're no longer in the same metabolic realm as a normal cell doing normal ATP and aerobic versus anaerobic. If you're aerobic using oxygenation, the light therapy is going to stimulate, because it's a complex cycle. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Oh, flash some red light at any mitochondria and it's going to stimulate its growth. No, it's not that simple. It stimulates, it's complex. It's not that simple. Just like photosynthesis isn't that simple. Cancer cell glycolysis, it doesn't care about anything else. It's a simple cell. It's not it hasn't graduated to be a very smart cell. It's a great cell for survival and adaptive, being adaptive. That's for sure. It's a survivor, right? The reason why you can throw chemotherapies and radiotherapies in the kitchen sinks at cancer cells, and some of them will look at you and laugh, right? It doesn't faze them. How in the world, and let's put that into context, because I think it's powerful. you're putting a poison, right, that kills your normal cells in a heartbeat. And yet, and a cancer cell will look at you and go, yeah, whatever. Give me something. Why don't you bring something really that's gonna hurt me? And yet, that's part of our oncological approach, is using these types of therapies that obliterate healthy cells, in a 1-to-1 ratio. If you gave any healthy cell or any cancer cell a chemo or radiation, which one's going to die first? The healthy cell,
Yeah.
right? So that in turn, you have to help these guys while going after these guys. That's that integrative approach we talk about and we shared about earlier. That is just makes perfect sense to me, because these cancer cells are tough, man. They're adaptable. They're survivors. And if chemo or radiation can't slow them down in the manners that we have over the past 40 years, what does that tell you about the type of cell you're dealing with? You better come up with a better plan than just simply trying to blast it away with chemo or radiation.
Indeed. Another question I had is, so we're talking about mitochondrial health. We're talking about it from a supplement perspective. What is, you hear about, say, high intensity interval training or something like that,
Okay.
being good for mitochondrial health. What's the is it is it like different? Is it different ways of helping the mitochondria? Like, is it if you're doing high intensity interval training, and obviously, maybe that's not the best example, because I don't know if like a stage 4 cancer patient necessarily wants to be picking up a kettlebell or something like that. But are you getting essentially the same benefits in that, because you just hear about it's good for the mitochondria, but I don't hear any more specifics than that. So like, would my morning kettlebell high intensity interval training workout be the same thing as taking a shot of Poly-MVA from a metabolic health standpoint, or what's different there? I assume you're getting different types of benefits under the same umbrella, but another thing I've just wondered about, if that made any sense at all.
So when you're exercising now and you're doing specific oxygenation type exercise, you're in a healthy place, you're requiring you're giving your mitochondria and your body, your muscles, your cells, your tissues, everything they need to maximize their output, right? To be efficient. But again, you wouldn't do that to a cancer patient, because the immune system has already made a shift in its power and its energy levels and its reserves to take care of your immune system as best it can, or it's been brought down so low that it's not even functioning. So you have to try and kick your immune system back up. Well, don't be going do some high intensity workouts when you're already compromised now. But go do a little bit of something and work your way up depending on what that person's might be. Is that going to be beneficial? Totally. Because the more you engage the mitochondria, the more you say, hey, come to work. Let me start working out. Let me start moving. Great. That starts forcing your body's metabolism to say, be active. Oh, you go into a different state of metabolism when your body is healthy. You have lean body muscle mass. Your body utilizes the energy that you're taking in. You have high metabolism, right? What gives kids so much energy? Right?
Yeah.
The fact that they're growing, they have more growth factors, they have more repair factors. Why do kids heal so much better, as you're finding out here now in your mid-30s, right? You don't heal as much, right? You're a whole.
True.
Wait till you get to 50, buddy. Trust me, it's even slower. But that's just it. Your physiology. Guess what? Your DNA is still the DNA. But how come it's not like it was when you were 20? How come you can't go and run the way you ran then and recover the way you recovered? Hundreds, if not thousands, of different factors to that reason, but you get the basic point. Our bodies age, they break down, they get slower, they get less efficient. By being more efficient and by utilizing the mitochondria to stay efficient, and that is through exercise. It's the only way. So high intensity or oxygenated supported workout, you're just pumping, you're saying, hey, mitochondria, here you guys go. You're working out while you're doing that. They stay healthy. They in turn keep other things healthy when they're healthy. If they suffer, everything else suffers.
Very good. Very good. And then back to, I guess a couple more just practical questions on Poly-MVA. A lot, we talked about why it's good for good for healthy cells and potentially good for making cancer cells healthy cells, or making them go away, one of the two. It's also very, people going through conventional treatment also see a lot of support from the side effect side of things, if I'm not mistaken there. Is that correct, when using Poly-MVA?
Well, right, because like we talked about earlier, if it's helping normal metabolism, what a great thing to do. If that's all it does, right, is just keeps your healthy mitochondria healthy while you're going through a difficult regiment of and protocols on this side with, like in cancer patients, that's a good thing. Keep your healthy systems healthy and go treat, let the oncologist treat the cancer if that's what you decide to do. But please don't ignore your mitochondria, because these treatments are not only going to affect those cancer cells, they are also going to affect your healthy cells. So you better protect them. And this is where, when you have something like poly with the lipoic acid and the thiamine, you're getting the best of both worlds in a complex that you can't get individually. So someone could take, they always say, well, why don't I just take all the various combinations of things that are mixed in poly and just take that? Well, you could, but it's not the same because they're complex. So literally picture alpha lipoic acid and picture thiamine, two great cofactors that are two great partners that dance well together. But if the ALA doesn't show up at the mitochondria that you need to, or the thiamine doesn't show up at the mitochondria when you need to, then it can't be as efficient. So Dr. Garnett took the ALA, took the thiamine, and bound them together in a complex. Now you got the redox molecule. ALA on one side, water and fat soluble, thiamine on the other side, energy production. Now you can see how it can just upregulate and protect the cell and support the mitochondria at the same time.
Yeah, and I suppose that's why so many naturopathic oncologists that I talk to, that's one of their go-tos, is they're dealing with people that not only want to beat cancer, but, well, yeah, they want to beat cancer, but they might be doing it all naturally, or they might be doing it, integrative approach with conventional medicine, but it's, it supports on both sides, so it's
right.
Pretty cool. And then what's the difference between oral consumption and IV administration in terms of benefits or goals, that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, clearly when you do anything from an IV perspective, you're bypassing your digestive system and going directly into your blood, so your tissues can get a higher concentration of it. So for the same reasons you would give the nutritional support therapies with other things, of whether it's like a nutrient vitamin cocktail, amino acids, potassium, magnesium, sodium, all the things that your body needs, it's a more advantageous for them, because many times the doctors, they're the ones treating the patients, and they know that many times the patients is so depleted that they need to restore them. So it's a balancing thing. It's not an all the time thing, but initially, if we're talking, advanced patient who needs a lot more support, then clearly this helps them to support that. So, the poly just gives them a universal product that they can not only send them home with the PO product, but then also support them if their protocol calls for that, the other way around, which is the best of both worlds.
And I know on the literature, gosh, that either is on your website or comes with every order, or maybe both, you have some general dosing. I know some general oral dosing guidelines.
Right.
Is there anything in there about IV, or like if somebody were to go to, because not everybody is in the same town as a naturopathic oncologist, or, somebody who is familiar with using, IV Poly-MVA, but they do have somebody that's willing to administer, infusions of their discretion. Where would such a practitioner go to find, like, IV dosing guidelines?
That's where they'd have to go and get that from the physicians. So, poly itself is an oral dietary supplement. What the physicians and how the physicians use it is that's their right as a physician to treat their patients the best way they see fit. So it's something that they would have to research and find out, because like you mentioned earlier, Dr. Anderson, the other naturopathic oncologists, those are their protocols, those are their approaches. And the oral protocols are what they get supported with at home, because that's what poly is. How they decide to use it would be up to them.
So a physician would need to go find out from his physician buddies, more or less.
Right, and there's, they have online physician trainings.
Yeah.
Dr. Anderson provides those physician trainings, and naturopathic oncologists have those at least, once, twice, multiple times a year. So that whole industry is that way, and we always refer him to Dr. Anderson as it is.
All that being said, I know we're running low on time here. I do want to make sure folks know how to get it and all that good stuff. And I see it a lot of different places. And this is actually something I always try to be wary of when you see it, say on Amazon, for instance, and there's a bunch of different sellers. And I think that was the case last time I looked at Poly-MVA on Amazon. And I just wanted to figure out, sometimes this is something I hear about from, I don't know, like I'll contact a company about something and I'll mention they're on Amazon. And they say, oh, well, these sellers should be selling it, but these sellers aren't authorized, that sort of thing. Is that a concern with you and with Amazon, or just where to get it, or pretty much anywhere to get it's fine? And just anything else you want to let folks know about in terms of how to get their hands on Poly-MVA?
Well, I mean, the easiest way, of course, is if you go to polymva.com, POLYMVA.com, that's us. And that's, then I can guarantee it. Again, Amazon's tough because you have different resellers and there's not as many as there used to be. So we're trying to make sure that the ones that are on there are authorized, and there's only one that really is doing it the right way, giving the, when you have someone that's utilizing something like Poly, it's very specific for a sense of how it is and what they're doing. So this isn't something for many patients. For some, if they're just wanting to use it from a preventive and supportive, then that's great. But many times they need counseling, they need support. And if they have a disease, my goodness, they need to be working with their oncologist if it's a cancer patient, because there's lots of factors going on. So that's the most important thing, is the information from that perspective. But again, making sure they get the right bottle. Unfortunately, there are people in this world that will do all kinds of things to say it's something, and I can't necessarily verify that. When people have questions saying that they bought product from a certain seller or somebody else on a certain site, then I can't do anything about that. So the only thing I can do is just let them know that if they contact us, then for sure they can get it from the right source.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. And were you said something about folks listening to this show once contacting, you wanted to give them some sort of deal, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to, as a benefit for what you're doing and putting the information out there for people. So if they contact or go through the code that you have in the situation, however they find your podcast and things of that nature, then we can give them a $25 off per bottle, and we'll send them either a coupon code, or we'll do a link code through your site, depending on how you set this to them, and just make it as easy as possible. But they can always call up and mention, Stern's, podcast, and
really talk about this before the show, but we usually just use the word Stern for a discount code whenever something like this applies. And
okay.
So we'll make that work, and yeah, I suppose see about setting up a link, and I will clarify all of this in the outro if there's anything else to be clarified, I suppose. But for the time being, Al, really appreciate you coming on, and I'm glad to. Like I said, I've seen you talk so many times that it's, really glad to get to spread it to a little larger audience than I usually see you talking to maybe a few hundred people in a conference room. And
sure.
This is going to be listened to by many more than a few hundred people. So yeah, I'm excited.
Wow. I'm honored and I'm humbled. Thank you, Ryan, for what you're doing and how you're doing it. Trying to get people the right information, the best information, so they can make the best decision that's possible for their situation. Because that's what we ultimately want, and we know there's many paths to healing and many options that they have, and if they ever have a question or need something on Poly, that's why Poly's here. There is no silver bullet. There is no one answer that helps a certain situation, because every patient that I've ever seen and every person is in a different place, even with identical same cancers. which tells me a lot about health, the body, healing, the repair, and the cancer itself. So it's a journey we're all on. You know, I'm only here because of the shoulders that I got to stand on, not because of anything that I specially did or anything like that. I didn't discover this. And this all goes to Dr. Garnett. I didn't lay the groundwork for it. That was my dad. And yet meeting people like you along the way is a great thing to share, because we have that commonality, and we know it's such a difficult situation for anybody who has cancer. So how can we help them to do better than what we did?
Awesome. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Al Sanchez, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
There you go, the last interview-based show on the anti-cancer revolution before we make the switch to the great work of healing, and I thought it was a very good one. As you can tell, Al's got a very firm grasp on the big picture when it comes to cancer, and I believe a large part of that is due to the fact his heart is clearly in it for all the right reasons with his family history and everything. Hope that cleared up a lot of questions around mitochondria and cancer. I know it did for me, and I will note that in all the doctors I talk to, conferences I go to, books on cancer I read, etc., I can count the products there is near universal agreement on one hand, and still have a few fingers left over. Let's put it that way. Yet, Poly-MVA is indeed one of those things that just about anyone you hear from on the integrative side of the fence agrees would be very good for just about anybody. And that's really something quite remarkable, that there's anything all these people agree on at all, as you probably know all too well yourself. Definitely avail yourself of that discount Al so graciously provided with the Stern code. On that note, I don't see one that big anywhere, just on the internet clicking around. And again, one more time, during this time of great change, no, not 2020, I mean with this show splitting off into two different shows, the Anti-Cancer Revolution featuring professional integrative cancer presentations, and the Great Work of Healing featuring interviews on the widest spectrum possible of healing modalities. The absolute best way to make sure you're getting everything we put out is to get on our email list at thesternmethod.com. And we've got a whole ton of great new stuff coming out on that note, aside from the shows. Weekly how-to videos, day-in-the-life type videos showing how we pack all this stuff into our day, Q&A videos where Teddy and I answer the most interesting questions we get for all to see, videos of me telling folks what I think they might need to hear, probably a couple other things I'm forgetting. So all that said, again, get on the email list to make sure you're in the loop. And that's all for me for today. See you back here for the first presentation under the new format, and see you over at the Great Work of Healing for our first interview there. I'm Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and if you are going through cancer, just keep going.